All right, welcome back, but I'm just going to take it from here.
Yes, well, there's been this movement all over the world to contain the coronavirus disease, and a number of organizations, private sector organizations, public sector organizations, have been involved in corporate social responsibility initiatives, personal social responsibility initiatives all over the place. And the concern here now is, how is this being managed generally and specifically? We have to have this conversation with us, the Chief Executive and founder of CSR-in-Action, Bekeme Masade-Olowola. She joins us via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us in our
Oh,
conversation this
thank
morning.
you.
First of all, your take on the movement so far, especially of the organized private sector in this whole conversation about dealing with coronavirus disease in Nigeria?
My view. Okay, so I do think that I was the private sector has stepped up really, really well. I mean, there have been all sorts of donations made from different companies, from banks like Access, GT. We've seen Dangote, we've seen Zenith, we've seen lots of donations, and I think that they've stepped up. Beyond that, they're giving out relief materials. They've set up infrastructure. They've done all sorts of things that are expected of private sector organizations. So they're meeting their obligation to their host government. And I think that to a large extent, many of them are also meeting up to their obligations to their consumers and customers and communities. There are some sectors that we feel that can, step up a little more. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had written an article asking companies who work in essential services to step up their game, because there are basic things that people need at this time, not necessarily money, not necessarily testing centers or other health facilities, but basically they need food directly to their homes. They need toothpaste, they need other toiletries. And I do think that companies who are already producing this can step up to do this. We recommended that they can use their advertising budgets to meet this gap, because we know what they say about word of mouth PR being better. So even as a corporate entity, I mean, you still make profit in some way from doing that, as opposed to keeping, whatever you would have gained for the period and using it for advertising or other such promos in the future.
Well, one of the conversations we had with a member of the presidential task force on COVID-19 said, to a large extent, most of the donations that were announced by the corporate organizations and individuals, they are largely in kind, as opposed to the cash that's been announced. And of course, naturally, there have been concerns about how the funds, if there are funds involved, have been or are being managed. What's your take on all of that?
So that's a big challenge, because I mean, what you've just said literally is actually the big challenge. When Mrs. Folorunsho Alakija of Fanfa Oil made her donation, we saw a breakdown in the papers. She said, okay, 50 or 500 million for so, or 50 million for this, and 25 million for that, and all of that. And we could see how it amounted to the almost 1 billion that she gave. Now, for the others, we've had announcements saying, I've given 1 billion naira, I've given 100 million naira, and all of that. But we haven't, okay, a system specs, for instance, also said we gave 50 million naira in cash, and then we did so and so with the other 50 million. But when we have a government that doesn't feel that it's our business to know how funds have been received, whether in cash or kind, then there is a big problem. Okay, so private sector may have chosen to make contributions to the government in cash or in kind. They may have chosen whether or not to publicize it. That is the breakdown, and they may have. We don't know whether or not they did, but it's not our job to go out and start looking, oh, how did they say that they gave this money? If our government seeks to be accountable, then this is something that they should announce. Once we saw some infograph showing us how much CBN had received to the tune of about 43 billion, okay? And I think that's the last that we've heard of it. We've had arguments in court between different bodies saying, okay, this is what Premium Times estimates it to be 43 billion in contributions. And then we have the Ministry of Finance saying it's actually 30 billion they've received. So are these separate monies? And if they are, who is coordinating all of these? It's really a source for concern. The reason why we're having this conversation obviously is because I've been writing a lot about what I think on this, and I gave examples of different countries who are arguably in the same boat as us, that is developing countries, and you would see that they're making every effort possible to show that they're in this to win it. They're in there to be transparent, to be accountable. We have the situation of Brazil, created an online portal. Citizens can go there and determine how much money was spent. In Panama, there has been innovation as well. I mean, they're using their national ID cards, and they're using it to give funding to citizens. And then here in our country, we're saying, oh, we're giving out interventions and to how many people, which people are receiving. And we're hearing stories like, they don't want to be known. I'm surprised to hear that, because we constantly see government programs and private sector programs where people have been beneficiary of funds, all the likes, and they've been out on TV, on the papers saying, oh, thank you for this, for this. So who are the people who are actually refusing to be known? We have to be able to be clear as to how monies that are gotten are being utilized. We have to know who's collecting. Again, that's why we've suggested that we have an online portal. We have the TSA, again, by Systems-Spec, that is there for us to use. Instead of us to have a different collection by the CBN, different collection by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, why don't we just have one central portal for both collecting and disbursement? Okay, what is the struggle with that? So that's something that we actually, as citizens, expect our government to do. I speak and I'm passionate about this because we have a Good Citizen initiative that is very concerned about transparency in the government. It's about expecting that we, as individuals, do our bit, and that the government meets us halfway. After all, the government is made up of fellow citizens as well. And I can tell you for free, and you know that human beings by nature are not necessarily transparent. But when you're part of a government with checks and balances, you expect that these checks and balances will compel the government to do what it needs to do. We want to trust our government. We're not accusing the government of anything, but the government has to prove that they ought to be trusted.
Going through that write-up that you put out, the COVID-19 pandemic and the goodwill of Nigerians, well, you mentioned that for you think the administration of the funds has so far been unstructured, thereby causing confusion. And now you bring in the TSA and you suggest that maybe everything should be channeled towards the TSA. And I believe you're talking about, the CACOVID, the PTF, and, other structures that are getting funds in at this time. But you also know the challenge of a TSA, the fact that, in fact, the TSA was built in such a way that it will be hard to actually get money out for frivolous things. And at this point where we really need funds at the speed of light, if I can say, to tackle these things, don't you think that might be regressive in some way?
Well, I think that when the government seeks to do something, it will. The TSA only has the challenges that it has because of the humans involved in this. And we all know that when it comes to things like this, there's a lot of politicking involved. However, there's also PayLink and other such fintech provisions where you can easily get money and get it out. So I'm not saying to the government it has to be particularly this way, I'm saying to the government that there has to be a centralized pocket of funding. All funding should go there so that we're able to trace how it's being used. We need to be able to say this is how much per time, which is why I mentioned the TSA, because it was recommended to us by the World Bank in order for us to have a bird's eye view per time of how much we have in the nation's coffers, okay? So it's the same thing that applies to this situation. We have to know how much everyone has contributed in cash and in kind. And we have to know that there is a strategic plan for executing the funds and the in-kind donation. We have to know, I think what the government can do as well is to form, a special committee beyond what may be in existence. Why? Because we want to be sure that the people involved are independent, who from business, from the government as well, from civil society, mediating organizations, in order that different heads come together and work towards a common good. You know that trust is an issue here. You know that, again, politicking comes into play when it's time for action like this. So we really, really need to open this up. If we don't open this up, then, I see disaster. I was reading recently about the European Union 21 billion naira contribution and saying that, it's for the masses and all of that. And we don't, we are concerned. So where has that funding gone to? Who is overseeing that in particular? We have to be able to take advantage of existing institutions in the sense that we have monarchies as well in this country. How are they involved in this? How are they being carried along? And then going beyond government, if you went back to what I said about private sector organizations, I also think that they should be able to take advantage of such institutions like the monarchy and make sure that, people everywhere are reached individually. I'm concerned about this whole everything at the federal government's level and no clear path for how it gets down to the people. There really would be no point of contributions if the poorest of the poor do not benefit of the contributions that are made.
TSA. I do remember that as at the 5th of April, the finance minister did say that in the interim, the president had approved the restructuring of the TSA in order to better mobilize cash donations from the generality of our people and corporate bodies as well. And then she also did say that the federal ministry is presently developing a comprehensive framework for the transparent management of this contribution. So this is what you want to see, isn't it? So should we be optimistic that eventually it will turn out well?
Are you asking if I'm optimistic?
Yeah, as a result of this that she has said. So should we be optimistic, or are you optimistic, having read or having with this point that she's made?
You see, I'm a very optimistic person, so a short answer would be yes. A longer answer would be that we want to see it happen. We want to see actionable steps, and we want to see constant communication as to how this is happening. This will not be the first time that we have heard something like this, and I want to see that it's done differently this time. I want to see the government follow through on its promises. That's all we want. We don't really want anything more. I'm personally not asking for more. My organization and I are contributing to, helping Nigerians in a time like this. But I'm optimistic, but with some caution.
But the thing about, getting funds into the TSA, albeit the restructured TSA, but there are those who also think that rather than put money in the TSA, look at what the NNPC did. They didn't give anybody any money. They just thought, look, all of the funds that the sector has brought in, whichever agency, tell us what your need or your challenges or requirements are, we will then provide it. What about adopting that model for this other purpose?
I didn't get that.
The NNPC and the oil sector, rather than give money to agencies or to government, they thought that let government or whichever agency tell them what they require and they will provide it. Can't we adopt that model rather than put money or give money to these agencies? Do you think that will work?
Okay, so the thing is that it's a fantastic idea, but the problem is that our context is different. We have some sort of, a sort of all-powerful government situation where private sector organizations, rather than compel government to do things that government ought to do, actually, to a large extent, unfortunately, pander to government, even with big corporations that can actually influence the way that government does things, are not using or wielding their power for the public good, which is why I think that, they can be justified in some way, because we know that we live in a system where there can be repercussions for not doing what is expected of you from the powers that be. So I think that what we can do is some sort of hybrid, but because the businesses actually, and that's one of my recommendations, the businesses actually have a responsibility to pursue their monies. In the US and in other countries, they form and fund special organizations that would pursue the money. They can actually insist that they're part of the implementation, not just take money, go use it to do whatever you want to do. So one thing that the businesses can do, since I doubt very strongly, unless it comes from the government, I doubt very strongly that businesses are willing to stick out their necks and say, government, you must use the money in so and so way. And so I think that what they can do otherwise is to find ways of tracing their money and ensuring that the money that they worked hard for and have contributed to alleviating suffering in our nation is utilized judiciously.
As we wind down on this conversation, I see what you're driving at here is trust. Trust for the people, with the government. And I'd like to know in just a minute, how vital is that component of trust to us winning this battle? How vital is it?
Very, 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 very vital. The people have to trust that the government per time is telling us the truth in order for us to comply. That's why you have all sorts of conspiracy theories, because people do not trust that we are being given the full picture. So whilst you have the situation in the UK of the Prime Minister being unwell, being hospitalized, being taken into ICU, we have many instances in our country, Nigeria, of where government officials have just gone out of sight for being unwell. And so we have to be able to trust that the government is telling us the truth for us to comply. Trust will help us. The government can come up with all sorts of regulations and stipulations and all of that. And if the people don't trust, then they would continue to make it uncomfortable. And the same matter with the funding as well. So you've asked me earlier if I was assuaged by the comment by the minister over willingness to be open. I'm looking forward to that happening, but and I speak for Nigerians, I and the rest of the country want for the government to show us through actions that they can be trusted in a time like this. This is a life-changing moment. Many of us have never witnessed this sort of thing in our lifetime. And we know that it will pass, and we know that businesses will come back up. We've had such situations in the past. But I think that this is a time for the government to rise up and prove to us that they too have been touched in a positive way by these situations.
Bekeme Masade-Olowola, founder, CSR-in-Action, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're back in a moment. Stay with us.